I apologize. It's gonna be sparse, as you can imagine. Thanks for sticking around. I know this is difficult, but we will. Mr. Cartwright just stepped out. He'll be right back in. I can swear you in, though. We'll swear you in, and as soon as Mr. Cartwright comes back in, we'll get right to testimony. So you'll stand up, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God? Let the record show both answered in the affirmative. There you are. Okay, we have Mr. Nicholas Loris, who is the Herbert and Joyce Morgan Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and I apologize, Ms. Litman. Is it Zoe or Zoe? Zoe, okay. Ms. Zoe Litman, who is an independent consultant focused on issues related to fuel economy and advanced vehicles. And I think Mr. Cartwright will join. You got, the deal. You got 5 minutes, more or less. But we'll wait for Mr. Cartwright, and then we'll start with Ms. Litman and then Mr. Loris. Mr. Cartwright's coming back. He just stepped to the restroom. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Litman, thank you. You're up.
Good evening, Chairman Jordan and Ranking Member Cartwright. Thank you very much for inviting me to give some context around the Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Loan Program. I am Zoe Litman. I am a consultant focusing on policy and projects that connect clean energy and transportation innovation with economic recovery. But previously, I spent 10 years at the National Wildlife Federation, where I headed our advanced automotive and fuel economy work, and before that, our climate policy in the Midwest. And in both of those contexts, the question of how clean energy and advanced technology progress goes forward, we innovate in our core industries, and we rebuild the economy at the same time is absolutely critical. And I wanted to talk a little bit about where the ATVM came from, because it originated from the same kind of interest in seeing us lead in the next generation of advanced energy and efficiency technologies, but at the same time rebuild the American economy. Others have talked about how this program was part of the 2007 Energy Bill, a bipartisan program signed into law by President Bush. I would add that it's something that has had the consistent support not just of labor, of environmental groups, but also of the Chamber of Commerce. Really is something that brings together the interests in this country around how we go forward as a nation. In the 2007 Energy Bill, it did two things that affect the auto industry. One was it authorized a large increase in the fuel economy standards, the first in decades, that and did so under a new attribute-based system that was both more competitively fair and ensured that consumers, no matter what kind of vehicle they drove, saw improvements in fuel economy. But at the same time, it recognized that making that kind of big step forward in a next generation of vehicles required very significant investment, tens of billions of dollars annually in the industry. And that investment could come from anywhere. And it could be made anywhere. Today, not just companies, but countries are competing aggressively to see who will lead in the next generation of technology. In a global economy, we have a global economy. We don't have to be the only manufacturer of the next generation of vehicle technology, but we need to be one of the leaders if our economy is going to be strong going into the future. Effective market-based public-private partnerships like the ATVM make it more attractive to invest in U.S. facilities and spur and attract business innovation are critical to this process. Now, I want to stress that the ATVM program are loans. As we've talked today, where companies are successful, they will be paid back with interest, and the vast majority are. Second, the program does not pick technologies. It sets a standard, a criteria, and the portfolio of loans that it has considered support the full range of technologies, from innovations that improve the fuel economy of the Ford F-150 without impacting horsepower, to new made-in-America electric batteries in Tennessee. Now, we've seen a rundown of the programs and the funding with in previous testimony. As people know, the bulk of the funding went to Ford for numerous projects, as well as to other startups, such as VPG, building an innovative 6-passenger van accessible to wheelchairs and fueled with natural gas. So Fisker is just one of a rather impressive portfolio of loans that have been, as people have said, up to now, 98% successful. The taxpayer is doing well with this program, and communities and businesses are doing even better. I want to create just a quick picture of some of those, oh my goodness, some of those loans. We have everything from loans where, if we look at the Ford manufacturing facilities in Michigan, that they are flexible facilities bringing hybrid powertrains back to the U.S. that were previously made in Japan. We see electric vehicles and batteries being made for the first time in the U.S. in Tennessee. And we see innovations that flow not just to the big auto companies and the assemblers here, but to the ecosystem of suppliers across the country that are supported by these. And finally, I want to say that investment in manufacturing here is not just an investment in jobs today, but in innovation for tomorrow. And I'm happy to take further questions about how that has worked with this program, but it has been highly successful.
Thank you so much, Ms. Litman. Mr. Loris.
Chairman Jordan and Ranking Member Cartwright, thank you for giving me this opportunity to discuss the Department of Energy's bad bet on Fisker Automotive. My name is Nicholas Loris, and I am the Herbert and Joyce Morgan Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. The views I express in this testimony are my own and should not be construed as representing any official position of the Heritage Foundation. Investigating any potential cronyism between Fisker's investors and its federal supporters and investigating any negligence on the DOE's part throughout the loan process are worthwhile and necessary actions to protect American taxpayers and promote transparency in the federal government. But I'd like to take my time to discuss the underlying cause of these problems, and that is the federal government's involvement with investment decisions that are better left for the private sector. The Department of Energy's Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Loan Program, as well as its loan guarantee programs, create a mechanism that rewards special interest politics over market viability. The result is a systematic economic damage inflicted well beyond any loss that taxpayers may incur. When we politicize the economic process by allowing the federal government to highly influence decisions and investments, the incentive to lobby for those handouts is greater, and the incentive to innovate, lower costs, and rely fully on private investment is substantially weakened. Such a process skews the rules of free enterprise. A dollar invested in a government-backed project cannot simultaneously be invested into another company. DOE loans and loan guarantees pull capital out of the market and dictate who should receive it. This crowds out opportunities for new ideas and innovative technologies that may not reach the market because capital is diverted to projects that have higher political rates of return rather than economic ones. These programs are not jobs creators, but merely shifting labor and capital to where the government wants. And to be clear, there is nothing wrong with more renewable energy or alternative fuels replacing conventional sources of energy, but that shift will be more effective when driven by market forces, not dictated through government policy. And the market incentive for alternative fuels and technologies already exists. We have a robust demand for transportation and fuel. In fact, Americans spent $480 billion on gasoline and bought nearly 13 million new vehicles in 2011 alone. Globally, the transportation fuels market is a multi-trillion-dollar one. If any alternative fuel technology captures a mere slice of that market, they will make billions of dollars in profit annually. And this is precisely why we don't need the Department of Energy's ATVM loan program as well as the loan guarantee programs. Markets make these investments and take risks all the time, but rather than privatizing the gains and socializing the losses, risk and reward are properly aligned. It is also important to stress that whether a loan or a loan guarantee recipient is profitable or bankrupt, the policy is a failure. Any success of a loan is not the same as success of a policy. First, there are companies like Fisker, where the DOE loan artificially made this dubious investment appear more attractive and lowered the risk of private investment. Private investors sunk over $1 billion into Fisker, but much of that private financing came after the Department of Energy approved and closed the loan for Fisker. These investors look at government loans as a way to substantially reduce their exposure. A project may be an economic loser, but can attract private investment when the government covers a substantial portion of the downside with guaranteed loans. It essentially becomes heads the investor wins and tails the taxpayer loses. These bad gambles turn into good ones when federal government money is involved, and now taxpayers are potentially on the hook for the $170 million of loans Fisker drew down. Supporters of these DOE programs argue a few failures are worth the risk, and the number of success stories far outweigh bankrupt companies or ones that are facing difficult financial times. But the fact is that even if a project receives a DOE loan or loan guarantee, it is a mistake to attribute that company's success to the federal government's investment. Many companies receive investments from the private sector because their technology is promising and worth the risk. In these cases, especially when the government handouts go to more established companies, like Ford, the DOE's loan partially offsets private sector investments that would have been made without the federal backing. Layering on additional subsidies further misallocates labor and capital to promote politically favored technologies and diminishes the role of market signals that truly drive innovation and economic activity. More stringent government oversight and risk assessment may marginally improve the protection of the taxpayers' money, but the best option is to get rid of the loan program altogether and allow competition to drive investment. This protects the taxpayer and will ensure that only the most promising new energy technologies move forward. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you both. Ms. Litman, right to Mr. Loris's point, look, we want all this innovative, all the great things you were talking about. We want this technology. We want advanced new things happening. We're America. We're a country of innovation and entrepreneurs and everything else. But Mr. Loris makes a perfect point. Not only in this situation with Fisker did taxpayers lose $200 million, but the fact that we have the program jeopardizes all those, if you heard Mr. Wickham, 150 other applicants who didn't get the dollars. And now the investment capital, the private investment capital that's out there, they're saying, you know what, I think it's better to put my money behind some company that's got the implicit, well, not implicit in this case, the formal backing of the taxpayer, of the United States government. And so there are, of those 150 companies and a whole bunch of others who didn't apply, who are out there, they may get crowded out. They may not get the investment they need, where that next big idea is just waiting to bloom if they can just get the help. Because we now have this. So not only do we have taxpayer money getting wasted, we, I think, very logically have a bunch of companies who might otherwise get investment from the private sector but don't.
Well, I think there are a number of responses to that. One is I agree with Mr. Loris that it's not the success of individual projects, it's the success of the policy. And I think while clearly the program is not perfect, no program would be. It's in a process of evolution always, as all of our government programs should be. The question is not what's the risk to individual projects, but what's the risk to the nation if we fail to move faster, further, for the longer term.
No, you're making my point. There may be one of those 150 companies who didn't get help, who, if the government's not involved with this, some private investor would say, you know what, I like that idea. That's the next Thomas Edison there. I'm going to put private money there. Well, but you know what? Well, think about it. Nissan got money. Nissan's a successful company. So investors out there saying, you know, I can put my money with this entrepreneur. It looks good, but maybe I'll go with the big company that's got government backing. I'll put money there and get the return. Understand?
I do. The question isn't whether or not we're going to move into these next technologies. And the question isn't whether or not there's going to be investment. The question is whether there's going to be investment in American manufactured technology, whether that investment is going to be made here, whether the innovation that comes out of our labs and out of our private companies is going to turn into jobs in America. And we've tested that, not doing anything on that. We've tested it for the last 3 decades, in which we've seen a decline in America's manufacturing share in this critical engine of innovation and growth. And what we've seen in the converse in the last few years, and ATVM has been one of the key pieces there, is let's just take, and there's been a lot of talk today, just if I could finish for a moment,
I just got a minute,
about
or a minute and a half to go. Go ahead.
creditworthiness of these loans. When the ATVM was, not when it was originally authorized, but when the money was actually, I guess the money was actually authorized by Congress in end of 2008. That was a time in which no auto company, let alone an innovative one, could have gotten money from anywhere in the private sector. It was very dark times for investment in advanced technology. And these are precisely the times and the places, and going forward, the technologies we need to attract investment here.
I want to get Mr. Loris's comment, because frankly, my understanding in Ohio, manufacturing jobs are starting to come back.
Absolutely.
Particularly in the energy area. We just added steel jobs in Youngstown, Ohio. That hadn't happened in 50 years because of technology developed in the private sector, particularly in the energy business, that's being used on private land all over the state, eastern part of our state. So, Mr. Loris, I'll give you the last time to comment, and then I'll go to our ranking member.
Yeah, and there's a success story where we see the markets working, that we have access to our energy resources, and as a result, you have chemical companies wanting to come back to the U.S., you have manufacturers want to rebuild old shuttered steel towns, and you're saving consumers a lot of money through lower energy prices. But I would like to rebut that last point. Fisker was formed in August 2007, and it raised $94 million before DOE even got into the loan process. If they thought this was a profitable company or successful, they could continue to go through rounds of venture capitalism. But Fisker raised another $57 million between the time DOE approved the loan and closed the loan in April of 2010. After DOE closed the loan, Fisker raised over $1 billion in various rounds of VC funding. So this just speaks to my point that investors can significantly hedge their bets once the Department of Energy gets involved, and if private investors and VCs think this is such a good idea, they should be able to take that risk and reap the reward on their own.
Great point. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Loris, I have some questions for you. Thank you for your coming here today and expressing your opinions. Now, you've said your opinions are not necessarily those of the Heritage Foundation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You are currently the Herbert and Joyce Morgan Fellow at the Heritage Foundation?
Yes.
Does that make you an employee there?
It does. Okay.
So, but my impression is that you're saying that your opinions are not those of the Heritage Foundation?
That's correct.
Now, my copy of your opinions is printed on Heritage Foundation stationery. Is that what you meant to do?
That I did mean to do, yes.
Okay. And just so we're clear, did you get anybody at the Heritage Foundation, your employer, to review your opinions before you expressed them here today?
I did.
Okay. And so they're aware that you're here giving your opinions before this panel, are they?
They are.
Okay. Now, my question is about the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007.
Gentlemen, you for 1 second.
Certainly.
I just want to make a point. It shouldn't be a surprise that the Heritage Foundation is supporting free market principles.
We're not sure what they're supporting here today. We only have Mr. Loris. Mr. Loris, I read your testimony, and you spend a considerable amount of ink on the Fisker company. You mentioned Tesla, but you don't mention Ford anywhere in your testimony, do you?
No, I do not.
Okay. So, and then you move from an examination of Fisker, and then you move into a criticism that says, basically says DOE loans and loan guarantees reduce capital availability, reduce Americans' access to technology, skew the rules of free enterprise, beget corruption and cronyism. It seems to me you sort of morph into a general attack on the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007 creation of these loan guarantee programs, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. At the time, in 2007, when they were signed into law by our President of the United States, George W. Bush, did you express your displeasure or your disagreement with President George W. Bush at the time?
I was not working for Heritage Foundation at the time, but there is past research that we heavily criticized that bill and thought it would be bad for consumers and energy consumers.
You have correctly anticipated my next question. Even though you were not yet employed by the Heritage Foundation in 2007, it is the case that the Heritage Foundation itself was critical of this bill that President Bush signed into law in 2007.
That's correct.
So it might be a fair assumption to say that they agree with your testimony here today, the opinions you have expressed in front of this panel. Is that right?
That's correct.
That's my point, Mr.
And so my question is, if what you do is you examine the experience at Fisker and then you ramp that into your general opinions and conclusions about the validity and the appropriateness of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007 and these loan program guarantees, why didn't you include Ford Motor Company? Why didn't you include Nissan? We've seen today in the hearing before this panel that the vast majority of the money that was invested by the American public in this alternative energy endeavor went to those other companies, not to this Fisker company, but to the other companies that are actually making a go of it. And it's a 98%. Were you in the room when we talked about the 98%?
I was.
A 98% successful enterprise, these federally guaranteed loans, so that we could bring our United States up to speed with modern technology in the automotive industry. You were in the room when we heard the 98% figure?
Yes, sir.
You don't mention that anywhere in your testimony, either in writing on the Heritage Foundation stationery or verbally here in the hearing room. Am I correct in that?
I did broadly speak about whether or not these programs or these projects are successful. That doesn't make the policy a success. You have companies like Ford and Nissan that they're huge companies. They're big boys. They should be able to make these investments on their own. They should be able to take out loans from banks and do it that way rather than relying on the government's crutch. It's not the ATVM program.
Is it your opinion that the Federal government must now go back and confiscate and take back the DOE money from the Ford plant in Lima, Ohio right now, irrespective of how well Ford is doing with the program?
No, I think they should remove the loans going forward on any availability of that ATVM program to administer the loans.
Well, again, I thank you for coming here with your opinions, Mr. Loris.
Thank you.
You get off easy. We want to thank you both for being here. I appreciate you staying around for the first panel and your willingness to testify here on our second panel. But the hearing, we are adjourned.